easy to.
Yeah.
So
Joe,
there we
your
are.
makeup guy did a great job with your hair this morning.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Your makeup guy did a great job with your hair this morning.
Always does.
It has character.
Yeah, it does.
Geez, what the heck?
And you know,
Gotta
I
get
can't
you
do
on
much with
CNN right away.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I've been wearing the same clothes for about 45 days, so
Yeah, I know.
no surprise that the hair is bad.
You must be very tired of Zooms, Joe, right about now.
Oh my God, I'm tired of
Yeah.
Zooms. I'm tired of reading applications. The only thing
Yeah.
I never tire of is talking to the kids. I love
I'm
that.
sure of that, yeah.
And I'll tell you what, you can get so mired in all that's wrong with the world, and it's just totally uplifting to me. So all the Zooms and the reading and the report writing and all that stuff is worth it, because as I said to the last group I talked to, I said, you give me hope. I said, I love doing this. And
Well, the same is true with the Exeter students. That, we've had a couple of Zoom meetings.
Yeah,
with the
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Same
We
thing.
We feel the
thing.
same thing. I mean, there is remarkable, there's awareness and energy in that group that is, it's because of the place they are, what they understand about the world. And they,
but they're not unique, and that's
No.
reassuring too.
Yeah.
I mean, they obviously are very capable, but
yeah.
Yep. Anyways, so I'm trying to finish this last report. This is on Lithuania today, and send it out to my fellow interviewers.
How many kids did you talk to, Joe?
I'm sorry?
How many kids did you talk to or interview?
100 and some, a little over, I don't know.
Wow.
It's 110, 120, but we interview them or 130, I don't know. We interview them typically in groups of 3.
Well,
that's still 35. That's still 35.
Yeah, it was a lot, or a fair amount for sure. And I agreed to do 3 countries this year, which I typically have only done the last 7 years too. And I mean, it's like having, your third child be a twin, and you say to yourself, why did this happen? But
it's because you do such a good job that
we have twins, so that's why I can analogize a little bit. But but it really has felt like it's been too much. And I can tell by Jennifer's attitude towards the whole thing that it has definitely been too much.
So do you have to write a report on each individual student in these groups of 3? You have to write a report on each individual student?
No, the purpose of the interview is to essentially take the group of applicants down to a group of finalists, and then the staff makes the final decisions. And the reason why that's important is because they're the ones that have to place the kids in these various schools around the country. And they know the schools better than any of us who, we know a few schools, but we don't know the breadth of schools that they know. So that it's a good process. So I've been writing reports on in Lithuania, for example, we interviewed 40, we'll probably take 6. And we made it a group of 11 finalists. I would have preferred 10, but we interviewers and the country coordinator couldn't reach agreement on getting it down to 10. So I said, what the hell, let's stop talking and we'll just do 11. So.
So when you say you take them to what schools?
Well, there are about, 80 or 82 member schools this year. And that's a fluctuating number. These schools are all committing to giving full scholarships to these kids. And so, every time there's a change of head of school or there's a change of finance person at the school. If it's an easy thing to cut from a budget. And so there's a whole nurturing process with the schools to, keep them in. And then COVID, of course, had a really, I mean, that 1 year, what was it, 21, 22, we went in about a month from 80 some schools to 55. Just they just called and said, we don't know what's happening. We've got to marshal our resources. We just can't do this. And we got it, but it was a little precarious there for a while, but it seems to have come back. But it's always a process of trying to keep the schools engaged. And the big schools like in Exeter, for example, they don't need this program. I mean, they have contacts all over the world, and they attract people from everywhere, so that they participate. Exeter participates, and Andover participates, and Deerfield and the other wealthy schools, because they know it makes a difference to all the other schools that where having international students is a much more whimsical thing. And this exchange program works essentially like an adjunct to everybody's admission office for the purpose of 1 or 2 or 3 kids, depending upon how many they take. But okay, well, that's enough of that. That's why my hair's not combed today. So just so
forgive you.
You could get the same haircut I have, Joe, if you want,
Well, I've thought about going to your barber, but Jennifer kept saying, nobody can be as handsome as Carl, so just don't even try.
That's good.
Well, I think this may be, we may have a full house here. I think there have been a lot of people who responded that they couldn't make it at this time. So
yeah,
I say we start.
Okay.
And
well, I'll start if you, to me, it seems like if anybody has any information on how school manages its funds and how you raise funds and how you administer them, it would be you, Joe. So that's really why we're interested in hearing what you have to say, because one of the things that we've talked about is setting up a fund for, it could be for clubs to pay for speakers that would come to Exeter and talk about climate change, or might pay the expenses for a student to go back to his hometown and make a presentation at a town meeting or a Rotary Club or something like that. But, a fund like that raises all kinds of questions. How would it be managed is a big one. So.
Yeah, and when I wrote back, when you asked me if I would participate, and of course, I completely support what you all are doing. So that was never a question in my mind. And I raised a couple of points to you, Carl, and I think first and foremost, I think you have to go into this that donors really can influence even a school like Exeter. Maybe not as effectively as perhaps other schools that see the gift horse and are easily wooed. Exeter's going to keep it within its bounds of what it thinks are important things, because they have the resources to approach things that way. And But I have certainly experienced cases where a school hasn't really thought about something or thought it through or had the expertise of a particular donor or maybe group of donors, where something that wasn't on their minds already, the school's minds, was dramatically influenced by a donor. I'll give you an example, not a total analogy, but a pretty good example. And that is that we had a donor come to us at St. George's School about giving money, not 100% of what would have been required, but giving a substantial sum of money to build an outdoor track. And on our list of priorities at that much smaller school, it was nowhere near the top. But it really hadn't been thought about as much compared to classrooms and library and the more academic oriented kinds of things. And this donor said, I want to do it because of a particular coach for the Ralph Lotion of that school. And but I'm not doing all of it, and I'm gonna, and he was essentially said, you know, I want this done before so and so retires, the coach or whatever. You know, he kind of laid down his deal, and I went to the powers that be, and we talked about it, and we thought, well, we think we could maybe find a couple other people who could fill in the gap, and maybe we could do this. And building a track went from barely, if not at all, on the radar to, yeah, we'll do it. And I went back to the donor whom I had known over some time, and I said, how did you know to take this approach with me and the school and so on? And his, I don't know, cousin or something was on the board of trustees. He said, my cousin told me to do it this way. And I mean, that's so, you know, it can work. And obviously we were delighted to have the track when it finally got built and all of that. And so it was great. Well, and I would put, you know, not that this is, as I say, it's not really analogous, but it is where a donor can influence a direction even when something has been thought about it and is at a much lower priority. And so it can happen, first of all. But the amount of money matters. Mm-hmm. If we're talking $5,000 or at an Exeter $50,000, you know, they don't say no to an outright gift, obviously, but a gift that has administrative responsibilities attached to it, even if the idea is a good one, presents issues to the school. And while I know you said to me the devil's in the details and they'll work it out, I'm not convinced that they will work it out or want to work it out. And it will, what I would want us to go into this knowing is that it's a good idea, but any critique of it is not about the idea and its merit. It's about the imposition that it imposes on the school in order to implement the idea. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the way we would want it implemented. Mm-hmm.
Joe, can I jump in here? I'm going to just give you a little background. We have already had, I think you know, a Zoom meeting with Bill Rawson, where we've discussed, you know, this subject with him. And one of the ideas that he had was that Exeter, as part of what they are doing with climate change, is going to want to try and I don't know, develop isn't quite the right word, but replace wetlands somewhere on the Exeter campus. And we have no idea how much that might cost. You know, but another idea that, I mean, it was also related to what Carl, you know, is interested in, is having mentorships, you know, for individual students as another possibility, where a student could propose, you know, some field of study that they're interested in, and that will be mentored by maybe a faculty member or possibly someone outside of the school, who knows. But that would be, because what we, or some of us anyway, are very, very interested in is developing leadership amongst current students, so that when they leave Exeter, they can go out and become leaders in the world, you know, kind of the, not maybe as big a deal as Greta Thunberg, but, you know, that kind of idea of going out and become leaders in the world. So Bill Rawson may have this idea about wetlands on the Exeter campus, because that might be easier for him administratively, you know, the point that you were just making, whereas we might be more interested in mentorships, which would have this component of, well, how do you apply for the mentorship? Who decides who gets a mentorship and who doesn't? What kind of reporting might there be for mentorships and so forth? So, you know, this is where there could be really a difference in how we, you know, want to set up our idea and so forth. So that's something else that, you know, is in the mix here.
Well, I don't see the role that I think you're asking of me as one that we're I'm reshaping the idea. I'm trying to give you and give you some sense of how good ideas can be viewed by a development office and by a head of school. Mm-hmm. A head of school is going to go talk to his head of fundraising and say, you know, can you do this? And the head of there, that's where, you know, a lot of this gets sorted out. Because in this particular idea, there are certain things that it's almost like a foundation, what you're talking about, a foundation, a proposal that a student makes. Somebody's got to review that proposal. Somebody is deciding, you know, we're assuming maybe there's more than one and somebody has to decide. Mm-hmm. So there's a process there. Who does that?
Right.
It's probably not going to be done by a development person. That means that somebody has to be working with somebody outside, somebody in the development office who's going to have the primary responsibility for making sure this fund is being handled as a donor or a group of donors wants it handled, is going to have to work with probably a faculty member who has got to be kept on track, who's got a whole other job to do to, you know, make sure that the proposal is, or a request for proposals is put out, and the proposals come in, read in a timely fashion, and answer given, and gets the job done. So you've got that issue. The way the proposal is written, you know, the student has to go through a process of not just writing the proposal, but at least as this was drafted, and I don't think that it's viable, is that the student then presents receipts from what they've undertaken after the proposal is approved and then is reimbursed. Well, that's involves other people. It's imposing the expense on the front end on the student, which nobody's going to like, even though that's maybe more real world, but it just flies into the, you know, this access to Exeter. It's not just kids who can afford to front these expenses or families. So that's got to be thought about.
Well, Joe, excuse me for interrupting, but how do you think Exeter would react to a representative of the alumni group approving a request by a student to spend money from that fund, so that they don't get in, the school itself is not really involved in the administration, other than it's in their account someplace, and withdrawals can be made upon, the approval of this alumni representative.
I suspect they would not be in favor of that. If they're holding the money,
right,
and responsible for the money, to have a third party, even someone they love, who's not within their control,
And we're not going to be around.
can't tell what to do, that I
That's not-
suspect they
that's right.
probably won't like that very much.
Yeah.
But even though that would be, would get around some of the, obviously, and I'm not trying to throw up obstacles, I'm really not. I'm just trying to give you the reaction that,
No, we kind of knew there were some serious problems here, Joe. We're
yeah,
just
and then there's
exploring.
the amount of money involved.
Yeah.
And I go back to that because the more money involved, the more they will extend themselves. A school will extend itself. So
By extended
but-
stuff, do you mean be easy to
be
work
willing
with? or
to
be-
undertake
Okay.
the whole reviewing the proposal, administering the distribution of funds, however it gets worked out for the proposal, and reporting back to us, reporting back to the donors in a fashion, because if that doesn't happen,
Mhm.
well, one, they're not a very good development office. That the Exeter, one thing it does really, really well is report back about funds, or at least funds that I've known about, and scholarship donors are reported to about how the kid's doing. Well, I suspect we're going to want to know what's happened.
Right.
And that takes work to do it inside the school, to get the kids to talk about their experience and write down their experience with the Rotary Club back in Davenport, Iowa, and then turn that into something that gets distributed to the class of 64. But I suspect this is something that will have a maybe broader appeal if and the school is going to want to monitor what fundraising we do outside our own borders, so to speak, which is the class of 64.
Mhm.
So how much money is involved can impact the school's enthusiasm for a particular idea, not for the merit of the idea,
Right.
but for what's going to be involved with it.
Okay, Joe,
Joe,
it just happens that, I got an email from, what's her name again? The person that handles our class for fundraising and all.
Oh, Jan Goslin?
Yeah, Goslin. In any case, there are already 8 separate funds that you can contribute to now. There's a PEA immediate priorities, an academic excellence, financial aid, equity inclusion, health and wellness, athletics, the arts, and global programs. So
Right.
somebody is administering to a certain extent for each of those funds.
That's right. And I wrote down as a note before we started this call, is there any existing fund in place that could embrace this, so
Right.
that its systems could, and it's sort of its mission of that fund could take this on, and that the school would be, I suspect, much more amenable to a pre-existing form and format that a fund has, to embrace this. It loses something, and it may to you who are so focused, and rightly so, on what this is intended to do, that kind of, if it gets under some vague thing, it loses something. But the school is more likely to want to funnel this into something and funnel this desire to support the school into something that's already set up to manage it. Now, I'm coming across, and I know as sounding a bit negative, but it's only because
Joe, you're
don't
not
worry about
sounding,
that.
you're not
Okay.
sounding negative to me at all. You
Okay.
are raising,
me.
realistic bureaucratic hurdles
Right.
that we are going to have to deal with, and that's why we wanted to have your advice and
Well,
consultation.
okay.
So I just have
well,
a question. I assume you're talking about if there's a specific climate crisis fund, something that's a new fund has to be set up. That's more work for Exeter to have to deal with than if it can be rolled into another fund. Is that correct?
That's what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
if you already have, say, a faculty member who is, climate is a global issue.
Right. Right.
If there's already someone who's dealing with something akin to this, that to broaden perhaps the mandate of that particular activity or fund is going to be more appealing than creating a whole new structure with a different teacher, with a maybe a different accounting process for distribution of funds, and a different reporting process back to the donor pool. So I think the idea of trying to solve the school's problems, or what they see as their problems or challenges in dealing with a new fund like this, it should be something that we think about,
Right.
because then they're more amenable. I think Carl's point about perhaps an outside involvement in the actual approval of proposals and approving distributions of funds. I mean, we can always ask, but my gut tells me that.
Joe, let me bring a new wrinkle into this. One of the things, I don't want to speak for everybody else, and I especially don't want to speak for Joe Duane, who's not on the call. But one of the things I think that we're trying to accomplish is to disrupt Exeter and get Exeter to take climate change as a more serious global threat, and to accept more of a position of leadership, not only within the school and within the alumni community, but in the world. Now, I know that sounds very, grandiose. I understand that. But I think that what we would really like is for Exeter to say, look, we're sending these young people out into the world. They're going to have to deal with this. They're going to have to suffer from the results of climate disruption. And we want to help prepare them not only to deal with this world, but to lead initiatives that are going to help mitigate, the climate disruption. And so we don't want Exeter, well, again, I don't want to sound too grandiose, but we don't want Exeter to simply think, oh, isn't this nice? 1964 is going to give us maybe a couple $100,000 if we're lucky. Let's see if we can find a fund to stick it in, and then we'll just have however it's being administered, keep on being administered that way. Really, no. What we would like to say is, look, Exeter is now going to take much more of a stance here with respect to climate disruption. We want to do something new. We want to try and help our students face this new world. So we would like to, upset the apple cart a little bit here. I'm not sure that Bill Rawson or the trustees really want to hear that, so much, because after all, they've got a school to run and so forth and so on. But I think that part of what we want is that kind of a vision on Exeter's part. So we would like them to take this. I don't know if we could raise a couple $100,000, but I don't think that's outside the realm of, a possibility at all, especially if we're going to do it for our, 60th reunion in 2024. We've got a couple of years to think about this. So I think we could do something that, makes more of a dent here. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Well, I think
Nat,
that's well
I-
said,
I-
Matt. I mean, yeah.
I agree with you. Yeah, 100%. And don't forget, we're going to try to broaden the field by appealing to other reunion classes as well. So it wouldn't be just a 64 fund, but yes, it's our initiative, but I think it ought to get traction with quite a few other folks from different classes out there. And with respect to Bill Ross, and it's really been very simple for him to say, well, we're doing what we can to improve the institution's carbon footprint. We've got all these upgrades to this and that and the other thing. And by the way, if we put in that solar field, we're going to disrupt some wetlands, so we could use some money to do wetland mitigation. To me, that's, that just doesn't cut it. I'm sorry. That's all local stuff, and fine. The academy can do as much of that as it wants, and I think it provides good examples for the students, but that's far from reaching, far from the goals that we've set.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, in a sense, if Exeter becomes a model of how to run a school that addresses climate issues in a way that no one else is doing, that still is probably not going to do anything to help the world become a place that is doing that as a whole. So Exeter needs to, the disruption that Nat was talking about also includes the idea of Exeter finding, comfortably stepping up and sharing this way of thinking and being with other educational institutions, or just any way it can influence, because this is something that the entire world has to get behind. So it certainly is, in many ways, it's a very grand proposal, but it has to start somewhere. So we have to start with, what
That's the start. And I think in explaining our proposal, we need to be sure that we credit the academy for all the things that it has done to reduce the carbon footprint, and say, wow, this is terrific, but let's take the next step.
Could we also hear from John Coles? Because John has actually spoken with Bill Rawson about this. So I think John, has a important perspective here too.
Thank you, Nat. Hi, Joe. How you doing?
I'm good, John.
Good
How's
to
your
see
golf
you. Good to see
game?
you. Oh, doing the best you can, with advancing age and loss of flexibility and strength.
I know, but you play with those older guys. Cripes, you shouldn't have no trouble with McDowell and Jim Rogers and some of your other cronies.
Oh, they're doing pretty good. They're doing it. Poor old Jim's. He had a lot of back problems, as you know, and so he's getting through it. But he'll be back in a couple of months, I think.
You just got to choose your competition. That's all.
That's
You'll be
right.
fine.
Make it easy. Don't make it too difficult. No, I really appreciate your helping us out here, Joe, and I'm particularly interested in how we can expand our influence in this attempt and this mission we're on to get the school to take this seriously and to have it be the #1 expression of non-civi. That's kind of and make it the center stage of its personality, of its whole reason for being. So at this point, we're only 10 people.
11.
And Rawson has told us that we're not at all the team that he would choose if he wanted alumni advisors, because he's got a whole bunch of much sharper guys, much younger guys, much more diverse people he can call on that are in the arena right now. And that, I suspect he's probably looking for support for whatever the way he sees it, in those people that are, all throughout all of the alumni. So, but I do think that since he has shown a lot of interest in what we can do to raise money, that even if that we see the minimum for an endowment fund, we've been told is $250,000. But he hasn't, the one he's focused on, as Nat was saying, is he's floated, would you guys help me with this, with the solar farm?
Yeah.
Which is a very physical, very directly, just nuts and bolts thing to lower the carbon footprint. And it's definitely not what we're most interested in at all, because we're interested in them in the deeper consequences and meaning of all of this. But it seems to me that the minute we are important donors, and that we have that gives us a tremendous, it repositions us, not only in his mind, but in the whole school. And particularly our effort to reach out to other alumni would get, it would be very hard for anybody to object that we reach out to other alumni when, we're raising money. So as we raise money, we would also be selling our ideas. We would be trying to get more people on the bus and get the right people on the bus and build momentum and strength. So I wouldn't, as much as we worry about, how the influence of big money in the energy sector and how many times they play like they're helping out with the climate change crisis, but they're really trying to make money off of it, all of that. I understand all of that, but I think if we show ourselves to be effective in raising, putting together an endowment fund, that gives us an awful lot of clout in terms of reaching out and influencing the school in general. I wonder how you see that.
Well, I always get nervous about endowment funds because endowment, you got to be at 25 times the amount of money you can spend on an annual basis in order to have that, so that you got to raise an awful lot of money to get a little money every year. So,
right.
I mean, understanding what an endowment really means is you just, I just think you got to go into that whole idea of even thinking and talking about an endowment judiciously, because I think that you're talking about a lot of money producing, obviously, right, perpetually a small amount of money, and so the immediate impact of it, yep, is it's a long time down the road, unless you got Daddy Warbucks, who's going to give it all right in one big swoop. So
right,
I'd go to that idea, and Exeter has a zillion endowment funds. So it isn't as though, I mean, if you were talking to a lot of schools, you say endowment fund, they light up like a candle, but Exeter has them by the scores, if not hundreds. So that's one reaction. And Carl, don't take this as bad. It just seems like I'm struck by sort of the smaller impact of what you've conceptualized here. And yet I'm hearing from you big impact, disruption, endowments, big words about, how we're going to get their attention. One thing that had crossed my mind, and this, maybe Exeter's already done this sort of thing, but if there's one thing that I really never enjoyed in my years of schools, it was strategic planning. because it always seemed to be a forever process resulting in a lost product. I mean, everybody had moved on because it took 6 months or a year or whatever, or 2 years or whatever. Every new leader wants to do one so that the slate from the past gets wiped clean, but it doesn't mean they're actually going to implement much of this sort of thing. So, but we had a benefactor at St. George's who said, I want you to do a strategic plan. He says, but I don't want one of these dragged out things. And he essentially led us to a company called Capgemini, which I don't know if they still exist, but I think they were in Cambridge. And essentially what he completely funded was brought us together, an array that included alumni, including some trustees and informed people in education, as well as lots of faculty and some kids and so on. And it was a 3-day commitment And I think we were allowed, we stayed at a hotel or something so that the talking went on at night. And at the end we had the plan. And maybe we even did something with that plan, but the process was powerful. And as I've been thinking about this undertaking, I mean, it has to, you can want to dictate to Exeter, but it's not going to work very well. You know, even on such an important issue, it has to own what we're trying to do,
Right.
as opposed to feel as though it's being imposed upon them. And one way to get buy-in, it seems to me, is if you get this forum and you make the case and you do it right there, and it gets done by professionals who know how to move a process along. And, you know, and maybe they've done it, I don't know, but a strategic plan with the big, the big mission that you all have been working on, get you away from just this, you know, redoing a wetland,
Right.
or so that you can, you know, drop those tubes down or whatever it is that they're going to do. Or even, you know, a kid going to, you know, going off and talking to a group. I mean, it would be voted on by the board of trustees, and I mean, and to, you know, that might cost $300,000 to do a weekend like that. But it seems to me there, if the school were to buy in on developing a plan that really started with with a kind of a mission at the top, and then built it out, because then you get into curricular change, which I think, I mean, if you listen to Joe Duane, that's what he would like to see. You could get into some physical plant adjustment, but that wouldn't dominate what you're what we're talking about now. It brings it into the big idea level, where there's a forum where the most informed, whether they're class of 2005 or 1964, can make their case. And there's politicking and lobbying and all kinds of stuff that can go on, but there is some consensus arrived at, and selling the idea, particularly if we could fund it, might get to more where you want this to be, but in a more collaborative way than thinking you can be successful jamming it up the butt of.
I think that's a good idea.
Academy.
I like that idea, actually. I like that idea. Yeah, but I think that Exeter would have to agree. I mean, if we said, okay, we will try and raise, you know, $200,000 to $300,000 to fund this kind of a weekend, but we want you to agree, Exeter, you know, Bill Ross and maybe the president of the trustees or whatever, that you are going to participate in this, and that you are going to really try and up the game at Exeter with regard to, you know, mitigating climate disruption. You know, if they were to agree to that, then I think we, you know, could then agree to do some fundraising.
Well, it seems to me it requires, the homework to, you know, what this sort of thing would cost, you know, what's involved, what it is you imagine it could be, and you know, digest whatever it is that number might be, and you go to Bill and say, we think this is a really, really important initiative, way bigger than your typical.
Right. But we don't want Bill Rawson and the trustees to say, oh, fine, you're going to raise $300,000. Great. We'll have a conference for you. End of story. We don't want that.
No. I think you got to tell them what it is that you really are you want to come out of this,
Right.
and where you want this to be impacting the school. In other words, not just the physical plant,
Right.
not just I don't know, call it whatever, but and not, but you want it to get into the curricular
Right.
side of things. And so, I mean, you lay out the deal.
Right,
Mhm.
right.
Mhm.
The big
Yeah.
idea here that Exeter needs to buy into is that their future, as it's not only the future of the students' lives and all. I mean, the future of Exeter will ultimately depend on its being taking a stance about doing something to the changing the direction the world is heading in. Because
Yeah,
so
and
that could be
I think you're going to find lots of people who are going to buy into that. But
Right.
I mean, and maybe they've done this sort of thing. I don't know, but not just what this kind of process, it seems to me, does is it brings the smart alumni people and any other experts that they want into the room, making the case along with the teachers and their collaborators.
Right.
And it seems to me it's the kind of thing that might have the potential to make it everybody's idea.
Right.
Right.
As opposed to, here's our idea, you buy it.
Right.
Joe, let me
an
tell you a
investment
couple.
in something bigger.
Let me tell you a couple of other, pieces of this pie that you may not already know about. One
Yeah.
is that the trustee who appears to be the one who is going to spearhead whatever happens with climate changes is Ira Helfand, who's in the class of 1967. And he has already, won a Nobel Prize with his group of physicians to try and get nuclear weapons, removed from the world. So he's acquainted with big picture thinking. And, one of the things that I would like to do at some point, hopefully, if our idea goes forward, is to, and if he's the one of the Exeter trustees who's really going to be, involved with climate change, is to try and have a meeting with him and see how he feels, about this and how much of a big picture he wants to try and work on at Exeter to, get Exeter to take more of a leadership role here. So that's one part of this, which could be very, very useful if we could meet with him and if we, can get him to agree to, move forward with this kind of initiative in a big way. Another separate development is that we had a Zoom call with Jim Rogers a week or two ago, and Jim Rogers offered to have an unofficial conversation with Morgan Dudley in the Institutional Advancement Office to ask her whether Exeter might be, interested in a general way with this idea. Not anything that was, a proposal, nothing, again, that's official, but just to kind of sound her out on this idea before, laying this out with Bill Ross. And so those are another, and also myself, I'm having a phone call tomorrow with Jenny Wilson, who is currently the president of the General Alumni Association, and she happens to be the executive director of the Kennedy School at Harvard. And so my, ostensible, reason for talking with her is to, oh, Jenny, how are you? Nice to meet you. What's going on at Harvard with respect to climate change and so forth. And then see, get her temperature about how interested she might be too. So we are, there are some possible avenues here for moving forward with this, but go ahead, John, go ahead.
I wanted to add that we already know in the informal conversation I had with Rawson about 10 days ago, he said they had already decided they were going to join that platform called Second Nature, which which brings together universities and how they're going to manage the whole climate crisis. And there's an evaluation system. And they do a lot of collaboration between the colleges, between the universities, and now the top independent schools, of which Exeter is going to be the first one, as I understand it. So there is a lot of discussion right now. I noticed it a lot at Yale, for instance, tremendous amount of discussion as to what the university should be doing, what sort of a position it should be taking. So it's not something that if we came up with this sort of idea that you're suggesting, it wouldn't be at all a crazy something we just invented out of the blue.
Right.
And there's a tremendous amount of tracking and discussion, and there's probably people that are specialists in it, just as you say, you know, people that would be able to bring together a group and talk about what the best strategies seem to be.
Yeah, all I'm suggesting is that this kind of planning process could turn out, it feel more collaborative as opposed to just bringing in experts who's going to try to tell them what to do. And while it might be effective to just bring in outside big guns, having been inside the school, you know, these places can barricade themselves in their own particular arrogance. And you know, nobody does arrogance better than Exeter when it comes to where
You're right, Joe. You're absolutely, I agree. You're absolutely right. Exeter has got to want to do this. We have to convince Exeter that they want to do it. We can't come in and say, we're going to raise some money for you, do it our way. Not going to work. I totally agree.
But I think that having a big idea, you know, and Exeter can afford to pay for this process.
Right.
You know,
Oh, sure.
Who are you kidding? I mean, they can afford it out of their loose change, but and maybe they've already thought and talked about it, but it's just it seems to me taking the initiative to say, you know, and once you've understood what the cost might be, here's what we're thinking about, because it gets the message across that you're not just thinking in bits and pieces, you're thinking in a comprehensive way about a really, really big issue. And you know, Exeter wants to lead.
We hope so.
No, I mean, it does. Of course it does. I mean, I mean, they think now this need blind admission thing, that they're the great leader. Of course, they've been talking about it since we were in school.
Right.
And
they announced it under Ty Tingley, for God's sake.
Right.
Yeah, we've been there before, because it's
Exactly.
like a greased pig. I mean, you grab it for a minute, but then all of a sudden it slips away. So it's a dangerous thing, but it sounds good when you come out with it. Anyways, that's an aside. But I love Exeter as much as anybody. But you got to get them to buy in. And what kind of way? How can you do that? If you had somebody could give them $100 million and said, have a conference and do this and come up with a plan and let 100 million, whatever I said, you know, they would probably act more quickly than they would with us.
No kidding.
But
John,
those
what were you
people
gonna
are
say?
out there. Those people
John,
are
what
out
were you going to say?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, you had your hand up.
Yes. I was going to say that, you know, when you look at the different stakeholders, the natural place for us to look for more support for this sort of initiative is other alumni. I mean, we're talking to the students. There's a pretty small group, very active, extremely impressive students. They're putting pressure on the faculty. That seems to be the most promising way that we have access to, because we understand, at least I'm totally convinced, that pressure from donors, alumni, administration on faculty is not the best way to generate curriculum change. It just builds barriers. I mean, they're so hypersensitive to outside pressure, and they consider it such sacred ground that faculty tends to reject the Philistines that are not teaching, telling them what to do.
Exactly.
It's as simple as that. So,
and when you think about it, every professional group feels the same way.
Right.
sure.
And they're professional educators, and they think they are the experts on curriculum. So
Absolutely.
how can you come in, you know, even if we're still a scratch golfer, come in and just tell them what to do? I mean,
Exactly.
it just doesn't work.
Doesn't work. So then the crucial thing is, what is the best way for us to look for and build a really strong alumni, let's call it a movement, where we have the best and the people that are the most credible. They have the most resources in terms of moving other people, and that are most able to exert just the right kind of pressure at the right times, and get the whole school to feel convinced by this vision. So there we really don't, when we ask ourselves, is there an explicit kind of divide and conquer strategy at Exeter with the classes so that they don't get together on initiatives? I would tend to think probably not, but I think the system definitely does encourage separate. They don't, classes don't really do a lot of collaboration between each other.
Guys,
Not a lot of it. You just don't see it. But we've already put together, Joe's already put together a list of all the class correspondents, that we could connect with, and the class presidents are all available. But Ross, and every time you talk to him, I mean, the 2 times that I've had a fairly long conversation with him, he always brings up this idea of all the brilliant alumni we have that are in the middle of this stuff and understand it backwards and forwards, they're including himself, by the way, because he was the chief of one of the top environmental lawyers in the country. He was the head of his practice in his very, very fancy law firm. So he's an expert in environmental law. He's an expert. I mean, he's in that sense, I believe he's a great opportunity for us. I know that, you can be skeptical about the people that were paying his bills and his fees were probably on the other side were probably more the bad guys than the good guys.
right.
But still, he understands the issues. I mean, he understands them really, really well in terms of, what it means in the legal profession. But so the question would be, how can we identify what is the smartest way for us to use, the school's existing knowledge in the alumni office or other sources we can find? We're thinking about, we're trying to get an article in the bulletin so that people know about what's going on and they could connect. So that's one of the issues that we thought you might be able to help us with.
Well, I still think that it's sounding like a we versus them approach, and that's it's how do we arm the alumni to go tell the academy what it needs to do? And I would encourage you to consider how you can approach this sort of thing in a more collaborative way, because Exeter's going to go on beyond all of us, and it just I don't. And Bill Rawson, who is obviously the leader, but compared to a headmaster in a small school, he's almost impotent.
Right.
He is confined by a very vocal faculty, by a powerful group of trustees, and a very bright student body. I worked for this school in Africa, in recent times, and the guy there just made decisions. Bam, it just happened. And he could go from 0 to 60 in a second. Bill Rawson can't get to 60. I've known Bill Rawson since he was working as an intern in the admission office. He is a good guy and a very bright guy, and has done terrific things, I believe, during a bumpy time at the academy. But he's working I would argue, in a pretty confined environment.
Yep.
Where he just can't be headmaster. It's just, I think that's why they call him a principal at Exeter, because they're just the principal instructor.
And he's not even that, because he wasn't
he's not even an instructor.
That's right. And you think that was, if it hadn't been for the misconduct crisis, they probably never would have gone to a headmaster who wasn't an academic. So,
Well, he's more a herder of cats than he is an
well, but
Arthurian czar. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
so I think when we say we have to convince the academy, it's a big, powerful group.
Right. Different
not-
constituencies.
Yeah, and I think how you bring it together is going to be a key to success. I could easily be wrong. And
No, I
again,
think you're right.
Oh, I couldn't agree more with your objecting to a we versus them approach. I think it's a non-starter. I just think it's a non-starter from the beginning. It doesn't work.
Jim Hunter
Oh.
mentioned that in an interesting, comment. And he's actually a member of the group. Did everybody read that? He said,
Yes.
if we think we're going to write in and tell the school what to
No,
do, we got to, go back to square one.
not gonna happen.
And yeah, I agree with everything everybody said, but Joe, would enlisting or the aid of some of the Board of Trustees, is that a good approach? I mean, we got feelers out to do that.
Mhm.
I mean, it's like, I go back to my little tract story.
Mhm.
When the guy says to me, well, my cousin or my uncle or whatever he was, who was a trustee, told me how to go about doing it. So he didn't have his uncle, the trustee,
Soup time?
come and tell everybody else what to do. You went through a process,
Mhm.
which was, so I don't know. It depends on the trustee and how that trustee conducts his or her business with his colleagues on the board. I don't mean to be evasive, but I don't know how it's going to work. I think but our mindset, I would argue, and have said.
Well, Joe, let me ask you two specific questions. Did you have any dealings yourself with Ira Healthand when you were working at Exeter, or have you since had any dealings with him? I mean, do you have any idea how receptive he would be to this kind of an idea? That's one question.
I knew him. I think he was a nice Jewish boy. So
Smart Jewish boy too.
yeah, well, they all were, with one large exception. But yeah, no, the answer to your question is no, I don't know.
All right, so second question. What do you think of the idea of Jim Rogers having an unofficial conversation with Morgan Dudley about this general idea? Do you think that's a good idea?
I think at the where you're looking with this very important, vital, big approach, I don't think it's worth the time. But I mean,
okay.
and I love Morgan, and actually was part of hiring her when she was a kid coming out of college, when she worked in the development office. And she's very capable and very bright. But she's going to be very careful with giving out any names to people about people to be in touch with. She's smart. She's careful. She's not going to set one alum loose on another alum.
Okay, let me push you a little bit here. So you would disagree with Jim Rogers' idea then of having an informal conversation with her? Is that correct?
See, now you've changed how.
Well, we're trying, Joe, we're trying to figure out a way forward here. We're trying to figure out the best way forward. That's why I'm trying to push you a little bit, because we're trying to figure out the best way forward. So we've got to, know our steps here.
You can certainly ask her how she thinks you ought to go about it. But if you're trying to get names of people and people who might help, she's not going to get any of that.
Well, I think aren't we really looking at a chicken and egg situation here? What comes first? A big pile of money, or a desire on the part of the academy to collectively to move things forward?
But Whit, I don't see this as a chicken or an egg situation. I see this as, we have a number of different constituencies. We have to deal with all of them. We have to bring all of them together. It's not either or, it's not black or white, it's
No,
not
no.
one first
No,
before
no.
the other, but we have to deal with everybody. And, you know, we've got to bring everybody.
I
I think
think
no
of
one is,
chicken-
we
I
haven't,
think
we
of
haven't,
chicken, I think of chicken and egg in the sense that, you know, do we prove that we can raise a big bunch of money first? Or do we get a
don't think-
collective
I don't
buy-in
think-
by the
no, that's-
academy?
that's
Yeah,
not so
we
important.
need that collective buy-in first, like Joe's
Yeah,
been saying.
and you go back to the word raise, that sounds like there are a lot of people and talking to a lot of people, and they want their money for particular things, and they want to control that.
Mhm.
No, I don't think so, unless you had the $100 million person, and then you know, that's the simplest way to go about this.
Yeah.
It's
I-
just
and
hard to
others-
find that person.
We haven't
But
talked
that-
about there, I'm sure there are some faculty members who are quite concerned about the climate issue and I think would be allies in this. And I think it would be helpful to establish, you know, to see who we can enlist and who wants to be on the team in the faculty.
And we're going to get some good insight on that. We have people working on finding out, you know, the different faculty members and who the ones who would be, you know, most credible, most interested in you know, the sort of thing, the sort of strategic exercise you were talking about.
Right.
But isn't it being able to articulate what we want the most important
Right.
first step, to be able to write that down? What do we want the academy to do?
Well, Joe Duane, I think, made a terrific, you know, start on that with the, you know, the statement of purpose that he came up with. I don't know if you've, you know, seen that, Joe, but he really did a great job with that. It does not lay out in detail, you know, a plan of action, but it really lays out the urgency of this situation very, very, very well, I think, including the implications for current students and what they're going to need to, you know, have equipped themselves with in order to, you know, go forward into the world that they're going to be living in.
Yes, I totally agree that Joe's statement of purpose, everybody that sees it is really impressed with it. I reread it yesterday. It's extremely clear, very well written.
But we
But
purposely,
as
we
Nat
purposely
says,
kept you in the dark, Joe. We don't want you to see it.
No,
Well,
I've
I would
probably
say-
had the opportunity to see it, but I must say that I haven't read it. So
Well, I can
we'll
send it
get
to
it to
you
you right away, but
Yeah.
I probably have it. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Just one
the
page.
challenges we're
Okay,
facing right
so-
now.
so you have the vision, so to speak.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
So how do you implement? I mean, I'm not talking about the vision that is the crisis, but the vision of what Exeter's role would be in the crisis.
Right.
I mean, isn't that
Right.
And so what are the tactics required to be able to fulfill that objective or that
That we don't have.
vision?
Yeah.
No, that we don't
I
have.
think we have a preliminary agreement, but probably not really solid. But basically, we have agreed that since it is under discussion at the trust with the trustees right now, with a timeline of announcing something in May, and knowing that the emphasis of that plan is going to be, I think there are going to be two essential components. One is going to be the physical infrastructure stuff to attain carbon neutrality in you know, at the latest by 2030. That's going to be the physical part. Those are the wetlands and the sun farm and that kind of thing, and the geothermal things and the buildings and all that kind of thing. And the other part is going to be the communicational side of it, which where the students, and I would think we would agree with them, want it to be at the same level that anti-racism and the role of women has been in the last
Definitely.
2 years.
Exactly.
Definitely.
Kind of at the center stage. We would, what we would like to see is it being the number one initiative in the school's agenda from now on. And I think now what's going to come out of this discussion with the trustees is anybody's guess. I mean, I think they will normally defer to what the principal presented to them But these are people that are real heavyweights. I mean, you're talking about the executive dean of the Kennedy School. I mean, that's the leading public policy center in the world, the Kennedy Center. And you've got the dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Harvard on the trustees. I don't know if she's on that committee. We don't know if either Jani or I've forgotten her name right now. Gay. Her last name is Gay.
Gay, right.
Or Claudine Gay.
Claudine Gay.
Right.
We don't know if they're on that committee, but I would hope that with what's happening in the rest of the world right now, and particularly in the financial and business worlds, I mean, what used to be kind of a thing that only the long hairs were worried about, now it's very much a mainstream issue. I mean, it's the number one. You see any advertising by Goldman Sachs, the first thing that comes under it is accelerating the carbon transition. The fossil fuel companies are doing the same. It's in the center stage because it requires so much money, and the costs of these catastrophes is so great that it's moving mountains and mountains of money already. So in many cases, illegitimately. We have to accept that in many cases, illegitimately. But the investment officers at Exeter and on the trustees, and they have a whole bunch of really sharp people, they're watching this. They're watching how this process is accelerating. So it's not this kind of thing this way. It's this kind of crazy idea of a couple of guys, 10 guys in the class of 64 anymore. This is a really big.
I understand that, but what I'm hearing mostly is what Exeter needs to do is what every company and every homeowner needs to do is to become carbon neutral. I mean, but what you've been talking about, or what I think I've been hearing up to this point, is the curricular academic piece that we're talking about 14-year-olds who need to learn more. And obviously, if Exeter being able to promote that it has reached carbon neutrality or something by a certain year, I'm all for it, of course. But that's not really what you've been.
I think what we're after is we would like, these kids are from all over the world, and I would love to see them all go back to their hometowns.
Sure.
And be disciples of.
So you're talking
leaders,
right?
Yes.
Yeah,
All right,
definitely, Joe. No question. I mean, we can tell the academy, wow, you've done it. You're on the road to carbon neutrality. Great. You've won that battle, but there's a war going on out there.
Yeah, and we need disciples or soldiers or whatever.
Exactly.
And so is that where we need to concentrate?
Yes.
The academy's already moving in the other direction.
Right.
And I'm not sure what's happening in May, whether this is a grand plan that's on the carbon neutrality side or whether it is curricular.
I would bet, even though our highest aspiration would be for it to be much more than just physical infrastructure, carbon neutrality, I would bet that we're going to be disappointed.
Mhm.
We're not going to find it anywhere near as aggressive as we think it should be.
Right.
I would bet anything on that.
Right.
So the big question we'd have right now is, do we wait for just till we see that they, which is, I would say, is pretty much the agreement we've reached so far, or do we start doing stuff already in anticipation of it being disappointing? And I think the way I answer that question is we have to try to understand the actors here, understand the players, understand the teachers better, get the students moving, they're already moving, and understand, though, if we can find a couple of $100 million guys that would write the big check, well, that would help a lot. We just have to find people so that when that plan comes out, we can say, hey, just like Whit was saying, this is great, wonderful first step. Now we have moral credibility. Now we can show second nature that we're leaders among the top 8 independent schools, all the stuff that they have said. That's been their number one priority, is making sure they're number one in the peer group comparison with the other 8 independent schools. Rawson thinks we're going to be miles ahead of them. That's the way he talks.
Mhm.
Okay,
Well,
but that's not enough.
But right, but what Rawson has in mind when he says Exeter's gonna be miles ahead of everybody else is perhaps just on the Exeter campus.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
What we're talking about is how to develop leadership amongst current students, to prepare them for a world where there's climate disruption. So I think, what Joe's point is that, yes, we have a wonderful statement of purpose that Joe Duane has drafted, but I think to have a second document which lays out in more detail what is the plan that we are suggesting.
Right. I
that we would
agree
like to have
entirely.
discussed at Exeter, and hopefully buy-in from Exeter about how to go forward to implement a plan of action which is going to address the issues that have been raised in the statement of purpose. So I
Right.
think that is probably our next step, is to develop a document. Whether we're disappointed or not with what Exeter comes out with, we have something, we have to create a product that we're going to sell. We're hopefully going to sell and get buy-in for. And it can be a collaborative document, but we need to be able to, put that forward. Because Exeter is not going to come up with this plan. We're going to have to come up with a plan, I believe.
Yeah, just
I
something
think
like
it does.
the
It does need to be
roadway for
collaborative.
Exeter's future in being climate action leaders.
Mhm.
An institution that's a climate action leader too. A roadmap.
I think that second document definitely needs to be collaborative. Otherwise, we go back to what Joe was saying. It's a group of gray-haired alumni telling the academy what to do. So we really need that. We really need the buy-in. We need the collaboration somehow.
Right. I think the collaboration is key, but I think we need to make a first draft of this document so we can circulate it so other
Right.
people get our ideas. And then they say, well, we like this, we don't like that. How
Right.
can we, come together on a shared vision? Because if we say to Exeter, we'll raise some money, you come up with the, plan of action,
Oh,
that's
no.
not gonna,
Yeah,
that's not gonna get what we want.
that's right.
I don't think.
Good. This has been a very productive session so far, Joe. Thank you for.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Joe. This has been very helpful.
Extremely productive.
Well, I do think the idea of whatever that document is, its importance is to coalesce our ideas
Mhm.
so
Right.
that we can turn around and articulate them. And,
Right.
and I think that having to struggle with it, obviously Joe Duane is oh my gosh, if anybody can put out stuff, he can.
Yeah. Well, Joe Duane has put out the $35,000 foot document, so to speak, of the big picture. We have to develop the, 5,000.
Well, that's what it's bringing it
picture.
down so that some of us mortals can understand it and articulate it. And,
Right.
and I think that I think it will get to a more satisfying place than this, concern that it's all going to be about the academy doing exactly what, as I said, corporations and homeowners and everybody else should be striving to do, countries.
Right.
But we're really talking about the impact on kids
Mhm.
to then go out and do those other things in their hometowns, whether it's in Massachusetts or the Czech Republic. I mean, and to that and start to, how do we get to the point where those kids are prepared
Mhm.
to do that?
Mhm.
And don't assume that the colleges are going to do it. I mean, one of
Right.
the things that
Right.
one of the reasons why this is important, maybe even important at the elementary school level, is that you're trying to shape the minds of very bright kids.
Yeah.
Are not shape to enhance their understanding and their concerns about this issue. How do you do that?
Well, I think one of the things that, you were talking to Joe just now about what colleges are doing or what they're not doing. I mean, I hope to find out more about that tomorrow when I talk to Jenny Wilson, as the executive dean of the Kennedy School. But what Joe Duane sent around yesterday, which you may have seen, was this idea, this program at Harvard, with respect to climate change. Well, I read through it, and it's not something that the faculty at Harvard is leading.
Not
This
at
is a
all.
group of students. No, this is a group of students who've decided, well, this is something we think is important. We want to sort of get an interdisciplinary group together to try and inform ourselves, about climate change. But once those students have graduated, who's going to carry this program forward? It could already have ended. This article that Joe Duane found was printed in 2018. Well, that's already 3 or 4 years ago. This group may not even exist any longer. I mean, I want to ask Janie Wilson about this tomorrow and see what she knows about it. But I mean, we can't assume that Harvard or anyone else, I mean, maybe John was talking about Yale, maybe they're doing a better job. But I mean, I don't think that the universities are really stepping up the way they should
No.
in this area either.
But I guess my point is, you have crystallized minds when the kids get to college. They're I mean, we're completely, calcified, but what you have with the kids at Exeter or that age group are kids who are still in formation. And that's where, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're all still attached to Exeter, because we respect what it gave us, the tools, the understanding that it gave us. And while our later education gave us, tactics to go about things, we'd already crystallized the big principles when we were teenagers. And I think that's where Exeter's impact can be tremendous. How do these issues get into every discipline that they teach? How does it, isn't that what we're working on? Because we think, and most people who think agree that this is the biggest thing they're going to face in their lives.
Well, actually, the Exeter students, had a very good idea that they've already started working on in this regard. They said, well, instead of coming up with new courses, I think what we should add a climate disruption component to existing courses, including English courses, including all kinds of other disciplines.
But
so
that takes
the students.
Well, that's where a collaborative effort.
Exactly.
Faculty, with the alumni, with the kids.
But the point I'm making is that the students have already had this idea, and they've already started to have conversations with faculty about existing courses, to do this. So that's terrific, I think.
Right.
And I think too, that back to the universities, I think it's going to be hard to get them off the dime in terms of moving forward. There are a few, like back to Yale. Yale has a whole separate graduate level program.
Yes.
We changed the name of the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies to School of the Environment just a year and a half ago.
Yep.
So just to address, in part to address the climate crisis. So, but the undergraduate, part of the university will say, oh, that's taken care of by the School of the Environment.
Right.
Yep. Yep.
Unless someone wants to fund, endow a new academic department at my university, then we'll take $100 million to do that. Sure.
Right.
No problem.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're sort of getting back to the original idea of these, these that was outlined in the piece Carl sent, and that's good, but it needs the bigger framework, I think, that really says this is what our objective. This is not our objective to have kids be able to do this. Our objective is a way more important, broad curricular commitment to educating those folks who are going to go back to their hometowns and have an impact.
Right.
And we think all of them need it. Again, the trouble at the universities, people are all segmented. They've started moving into their own directions, and they're not part. This is general education, is what we're saying now.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
And that's been the emphasis. The emphasis here. There's a lot of really good things in the Exeter curriculum, particularly at the senior level, and particularly in the optional courses. I'm not using the right word.
Electives.
What do you call it?
Elective.
Elective.
Electives.
So when we talked to the students that were not seniors, they weren't familiar with a lot of the readings that we got from the syllabi that we looked at. A lot of them were, really up to date and really good. So they said,
but we're not really talking about the seniors. We're talking about the ninth graders.
We are,
talking
that's
about
right.
as they come into the process
that's the
of
point.
education. And,
Right.
you can have Italian on your curriculum, but if it doesn't mean much when it's an elective for seniors who've already passed their language requirement. I mean, it
That's
just doesn't,
exactly right.
if that's where it's going to be, it's window dressing.
Yeah.
Well, the
So
good
it's
news,
gotta
Joe,
be impacting at the younger levels.
the students we were talking to, I think it's been 11 or so that have been on a couple of talks. We all had the impression initially that they were seniors. Turns out there are only 2 of the group that were seniors. Most of the energy is in lowers and uppers, and that But that's the good news. The bad news is that they talked about how a lot of their classmates don't seem to be that interested, that concerned about the climate. So that's something that could, the school needs to find a way to change that so that they're.
Well, and that's a really good point, Conrad. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the kind of thing that we talk about with in whatever proposal we develop, and it becomes much more the thrust. We want
Right.
this to be like learning how to write
Right.
and learning how to think critically and learning the global implication or the environmental implications of everything we do, and that
Right.
it's part of the fundamentals.
Right.
Well, just as Exeter has made such a huge, investment in diversity, equity, and inclusion, which now permeates the academic program as well as the non-academic program, as far as I can tell, we want Exeter to do the same thing with regard to climate disruption.
That's right. Declare victory on DEI, declare victory on local carbon footprint reduction, declare victory on need blind emissions, and say, hey, here's the next one, guys.
Yeah, but keep it all away from the Supreme Court, because some of the victories
Mhm.
are more transitory than what we
Yeah.
what we might have thought.
We can only do what we can do.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, it sounds like our work is cut out for us. I think this second document that we need to work on to circulate among other willing collaborators is something that we'll.
I'm gonna leave here.
So Joe, I hope you will be willing to be a consultant, even if not a member of this group, as things move forward here, because
I think the
your comments today, your thoughts have been
road
extremely
should be
helpful.
better by then.
I second that.
The crews should be out in the salting, sanding.
The door is open.
As things transition to a cold.
Thank you.
colder temperatures,
It's
less rain.
a matter of just sort of managing myself. And
Sure.
It may. And I told Dave, I said, Dave, don't even
We'll
think
see how
about
that
me
goes.
driving up your steep driveway. I said, I'll meet you down in the pit.
Wait,
Keep
you
an
need
eye
to
out for me
mute
and-
yourself.
and
Whit.
I'll
You could
text
mute
you when I
yourself.
Get there.
Whit, you need to
So
mute
you can walk
yourself.
down.
You need to mute yourself if you're gonna, thanks.
Okay, well, I thank you all for asking me to participate. I'm flattered because I find you all very intimidating. You're all way too smart. I'm gonna go back and talk to my shrink about this and say, well, geez, I managed to at least say a couple of things, but anyway.
Joe, there are times when experience definitely trump brain power. And A, you've got the brain power, and B, you've got a lot more experience in this than any of us.
When it comes to
Well
schools,
said,
I think
well said.
at least I worked a long time in them. So anyways, I thank you and I appreciate your asking me, and I would be glad to participate. Don't ask me to write anything for a while because I'm tired of writing stuff. So
Would you like to be an official member? We got these blood oaths that we've taken.
yeah.
Member of the group?
I don't know. Yes
We
and
can-
no. Yes,
we
in
can
the
add
sense
your-
that
we can
I
add-
want to be helpful. No, in the sense that this is not the right time to ask me. I'm still feeling a little overwhelmed. So.
Okay, but we can put you on the distribution list and you can
Oh, sure.
participate
Yeah.
Sure.
Just
Okay.
when you have time and inclination. Okay, great.
Yeah,
Right.
and it
So
isn't
you'll
that
know
I'm
what's
so
happening.
busy, it's just that I think I'm busy. So that's where I am.
Perception
Anyway,
counts
great
for
to
a
see you
lot.
all.
Yeah.
And,
Perception counts for a lot in this life, Joe.
yeah,
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. Well, you're all terrific, and it's great to be so connected. I
Well,
appreciate it.
thank you very much for giving
Thank
us
you,
this
Joe.
time, Joe.
Good to see you all.
And we'll see a bunch of you tomorrow, I hope, on our class call.
Yep, yep.
Yeah,
And Joe, I just sent you a copy of Joe Dwayne's statement of purpose too.
Yeah,
So
I saw it. I saw it come in. Okay, great.
great.
Terrific.
Take
Thank
care,
you so much,
everybody.
Joe. Hugely
Thank you.
helpful.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
long.